This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and this is the Dell XPS 13, again, the 2020 edition, which is the model 9300. So this is the first time they've redesigned it in several years. The redesign is pretty subtle, but it certainly brings things that we all want. We're going to look at it now. So the XPS 13, already one of the tiniest little 13-inch laptops on the planet, it just got a little bit smaller. I don't think anybody was begging for that. It's already about the size of some 11-inch laptops. But what they have done is gone to a 16 by 10 aspect ratio display, so you get a little bit more height. And in that process, it's already known for its really skinny bezels, while the bottom one is whacked. And they have to give up the Dell logo to do that, which probably was a little ouchy for them. But now you've got pretty much a borderless display almost on all sides. And we still have the webcam up top, still 720p, still not amazing quality, but it's super tiny, and at least it's up top and not focusing on your chin. They've also changed the CPUs up a bit. We're still at Intel 10th generation, but instead of the Comet Lake that we had for the last model, the 7390, which was based on the older 14 nanometer recipe, but it was a little bit more powerful. Anyway, the Ice Lake that we have now is more power efficient, less heat, which is a good thing because the XPS 13 is tiny, and Ice Lake is meant for the thinnest and lightest premium laptops, so it makes some sense. In terms of CPU performance on benchmarks and stuff, you're actually giving up a little if you're comparing the old and new Core i7, but not really a lot, but you're gaining in graphics. If you go with the Core i7 model, you get Intel Iris Plus graphics, which is a nice big boost. And if you go with the Core i5, then they bundle that with Intel UHD graphics, which is still a little bit of a boost. So it's kind of a toss-up, but in the end, it makes the laptop less hot and less noisy, so I think that's a very good idea. As ever, it's a CNC aluminum chassis with your choice of that white basket weave interior like we have, or the carbon fiber look. And if you go with the glossy screens, then you get Gorilla Glass 6 on top. There are 3 display options, and these are all Full HD Plus, 4K Plus, because you get a little bit extra height. So 1920 by 1080 becomes 1920 by 1200, for example. 4K, which is usually 3840 by 2160, becomes 3840 by 2400. You get the idea. So there's a Full HD matte display for those of you who really hate glare, yay that. There's a Full HD touchscreen, which is the one that we have. And then there's the 4K, which is a touchscreen and wider gamut. They say 90% of P3 color gamut. We don't have the 4K one in this time, but typically they've been pretty accurate with their claims with that. They claim 500 nits of brightness no matter which of these 3 panels you go with, which is pretty darn bright. But as ever, Dell does this thing with BIOS-controlled brightness to make for the, generally speaking, pretty good battery life that you see with an XPS 13. But for those of you who really want to sear your eyeballs in a dark room, you really can't do it. When we measured the display on our Full HD touch model in moderate to slightly dim indoor lighting, it measured a max of 304 nits. And then we measured it again using our Spider X Elite colorimeter under these very bright studio lights, and then we got in the 400s, upper 400s, well, 456 nits of brightness, so getting close to their claim. So yes, it's possible, but yes, they're still basically controlling the brightness for you. That said, it looks really bright, and if you watch our Smackdown with the 2020 MacBook Air, you can see how much brighter it looks than the MacBook Air, which is rated at 350 nits. The display is also slightly larger, 13.4 inches versus 13.3. Basically, that aspect ratio change gave them a little bit higher diagonal measurement. When it comes to the size and weight, it's still very thin, 14.8 millimeters, which means, as ever, there's only room for USB-C ports, well, and a headphone jack and a micro SD card slot. So no full-size ports, but there is a USB-C to USB-A adapter in the box. It weighs between 2.6 and 2.8 pounds, which is 1.2 to 1.27 kilograms, with the touch model being a little heavier. So it's not the lightest 13-inch class laptop on the market, but hey, it's pretty light. As ever, CNC aluminum. Built like a tank, this thing is robust. So it's not a laptop I would ever worry about throwing it in my bag. I wouldn't want to drop it on my foot. The XPS 13 is not a cheap laptop, that's for sure. Not in terms of quality and not in terms of price. In fact, it's gotten a little bit more expensive, though. Maybe in the future Dell will have sales. You know how they roll. When it's brand new, it usually costs more. $1249 is the starting price for the consumer version. There's also, if you go to their business site, you might find the Core i3 for less. But for consumers, a Core i5 with 8 gigs of RAM and a 256 gig M.2 NVMe SSD is $1,250. That's with the full HD Plus matte non-touch display. You can go to town, and if you want that Iris Plus graphics, for example, you got to bundle that in with the Core i7. About $1,800 gets you that Iris Plus, a Core i7, and 8 gigs of RAM and a 512 gig SSD, and the touchscreen, a full HD Plus touchscreen. You can go up to the low 2000s, you get the idea, up to $2,400, and then you can go up to massive storage, 2 terabytes of storage, 32 gigs of RAM, the 4K plus touchscreen. So yeah, it's not an inexpensive laptop, that's for sure. Reasons why you would buy it would be, well, for those of you who like Dell, and they are a big name brand to trust, there's that. But if you're a Dell hater, not so much. You would buy it because it's one of the smallest, thinnest, and lightest 13-inch Ultrabooks on the market. And also because it's pretty darn durable. Like I said, it's built like a tank. And lastly, Dell does offer myriad configuration options. So it's nice. You're not stuck with the SSD you didn't want, but the RAM you did want and that sort of thing. So you can build to order and get it the way you want it. The laptop has pretty good stereo speakers, 2.5 watt times 2, and the XPS 13's audio does get better and better. And comparing it with the 2020 MacBook Air, where Macs typically have good speakers, I actually preferred it a little bit more, even though the bass wasn't quite as good, but clarity and separation are good. You get a white backlit keyboard on here, Wi-Fi 6, which is a Killer branded card based on a Qualcomm chipset. We haven't had that much in the way of any issue with it at all, other than the fact I noticed the range is okay, it's not stellar. All that metal on the chassis may be the reason for that. In terms of performance, it's an Ultrabook with an Intel U Series Ice Lake CPU quad-core, unless you go with the i3, and performance on this is exactly where you would expect it to be and in line with the competition. We have seen it going above that 15-watt TDP and going all the way up to 25 watts or more in tests. In terms of thermals, it will certainly push right up there at Turbo Boost Max for the first 2 runs of a Cinebench test, and then it will drop down like most laptops because of thermal considerations. This is a very thin laptop and a very small one, and like most thin and light premium Ultrabooks, you're going to see the performance drop down some. It still always maintains at least base clock speed and a mild turbo boost, say, you get 30% to 60% of your turbo boost, but max not for very long, which again, is fine. In terms of heat that you feel, it's well managed. They've been doing things with Gore and nice heat sinks and all that sort of thing. It's pretty darn effective. In terms of the core temperatures, it does depend on what you do, but like all of today's laptops, you can get those core temperatures into the 90s centigrade, where 100 is allowable maximum. But doing everyday productivity work, that sort of stuff, your CPU temperatures should be in the 30s to the 50s centigrade, depending in part on whether it's plugged in. When it's plugged in, it uses more power. You'll get a little more heat going on. The laptop is a 52 watt-hour battery, and battery life is going to depend on which display you get. Basically resolution, full HD versus 4K. The touchscreen doesn't make that much of a difference. So as ever, 4K is going to take off like 2 to 3 hours of your actual runtime use time there. But the full HD model, as ever, is one of the Energizer bunnies among Windows laptops, and 9 to 12 hours is what we saw. 9 hours in mixed productivity, some streaming video, a little bit of Photoshop work with brightness set to 150 nits. Obviously, if you're doing even lighter work, or you can drop that brightness even more, you'll get more like the 12-hour or 11-hour. To open it up, remove the Torx T5 screws. All the screws are visible, and use a guitar pick to pry your way around. Watch out, this is a little sharp on the underside, as XPS 13 and 13 2-in-1s tend to be. So there's our bottom cover right there, and that's interesting, isn't it? So a little cutout here, because here's the display cable actually running through the hinge area, not unlike what Razer did with the blade. Inside we've got 2 itsy little fans, Ultrabook size, with our heatsink over here. This is the M.2 NVMe SSD. It is slotted, so you can upgrade that after the fact. The Wi-Fi card is soldered on. The RAM is soldered on. You won't be upgrading anything else, but obviously this is the big 52 watt-hour battery, and you can swap that. The stereo speakers are flanking the battery. I'm Lisa from MobileTechReview. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos, and thumbs up if you like this vid.